but I really wanted to address where I think we're at the current moment and the events that are coming up on the weekend, potentially. So at the current moment, we have a global, multi-ethnic, anti-racist movement inspired by Black American culture, inspired by Black Lives Matter, inspired by Black American soft power, inspired by all of that history. Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, James Brown. We all know the history behind why Black American culture has, in a sense, kind of a unique level of soft power among any group of oppressed people in the world. So that clearly, there's traction, there's momentum, there is major reforms being won. Things are very much on the side of those protests and those people, and that, broadly speaking, multi-ethnic, anti-racist coalition that you can see if you've been on any of the, of course, Angela Davis, if you've been on any of the protests, you'll know that. If you've been seeing the footage, you'll know that. And so now the fascists want to come out on Saturday in London to stage a counter protest. Understandably, you know, lots of the man them feel that they should go out and meet, and I understand that as a philosophy, I understand that as a way of thinking, but it seems to me that the fascists are losing ground culturally, politically and intellectually, and so they have no choice but to try and provoke trouble on their terms, in their zones, in their area. And then, of course, knowing the police and knowing the right-wing press will be on their side, everything that happens, anything that bad that happens on Saturday will be black people's fault. I think there is a big difference between being willing to defend your community, yeah, if you need to, and you have to, and I obviously firmly believe in that, and what the man would call a draw-at, yeah? A draw-at is when you're just doing your own thing and a man just calls you out for no reason and you get drawn into an ambush. And if we look at the aftermath of the 2011 riots, as people will know, I do a lot of work in prisons. I worked with many young brothers doing major numbers in jail after the 2011 riots. I'm talking anything from 7s to right up to 30s, yeah? That isn't going to happen to the fascists because the police are on their side, right? So to any young brothers out there, I totally understand the way you're feeling. I know some young man will be like, oh, why is he saying that for? But I think responsibility, when I first saw that and I saw that was happening, I'm not going to lie to you, my ego got the better of me. And I was like, yo, man them, Saturday. And then I had a good long think about it and I slept on it for 2 days. And I realized, like I said, I think one of the important things, if you're a voice people listen to, is putting your own ego aside, yeah, and doing what you think is in the broader interest of your community. And right now the momentum is on our side, the culture is on our side, and what they want, like I said, is to win the only way they can win, which is provoking a particular incident or a particular unsavory outcome. Everyone can see the protests have been mostly peaceful. You're not fooling no one with the police charged through a few people and there was a little bit of trouble and a statue got spray painted. I mean, not even being in any way disrespectful, like you have what is a really peaceful middle class audience in a way, multi-ethnic audience, uni students, yeah? There's an element of the community that will see that as a draw-out and maybe get sucked in, and I feel a responsibility to those young brothers, many of whom are on parole, many of whom are on probation, as we call it over here, many of whom already got cases, many of whom want to represent and want to be out there for their community, and if all they understand is beef, then that's where they feel that they might be useful, right? For those young brothers in particular, stage a protest in your ends, innit? Yeah, do a solidarity protest in your ends. If you're east, if you're west, if you're north or south, you can stay in your ends and protest if you need to. Yeah, hold your corner, but go into the draw-out. I really don't think it's wise. I really don't think it's sensible. And so I wanted to say that, and I felt I had a responsibility to say that. So I think really what we want to be talking about next. Obviously, listen. By the way, don't like take my word for it. And don't listen to what I say, by the way. This is, you do what you want. I'm giving you my opinion, by the way. Let me be clear that I'm not telling anyone what to do. Let me be abundantly clear about that. I'm not saying, I'm not your dad. I'm not the president of black people. People have asked for my opinion. This is my opinion on what is politically wise and what is strategically intelligent. So if you're watching this, I don't want you to think, well, who's my man to tell man what to do? Absolutely. I'm not telling anyone what to do. I'm telling you what I think is strategically intelligent. And if you look back at the history of anti-racist protests in London, and you look where battles were fought by our parents, they were fought in Lewisham. We won in Lewisham. They were fought in Tower Hamlets, Brick Lane. Shout out to the Brick Lane man. They were won in Brick Lane. They were fought in Ladbroke Grove. We won in Ladbroke Grove. They were fought in Peckham. We won in Peckham. They were fought in New Cross. They were fought in Brixton. They were fought in Handsworth. They were everywhere over the country. Broadly speaking, even trying to explain to people from countries that are perhaps more segregated, say France or the United States, trying even to explain to them that hood in England is multi-ethnic. Even a majority black neighbourhood, let's be honest, you go to the ends and White Tommy's one of the men then. If you're in North Tottenham, Greek Cypriot Thomas is one of the men then, right? And so there is a, broadly speaking, multi-ethnic working class culture in Britain that is, even though black people are disproportionately affected, even though there's specific issues, even though there's specific issues facing black people, there is still that in a way that perhaps isn't understood or isn't the same in, say, France or in the United States or elsewhere. And so to me, they want attention. If they come to London and they get no attention, they go home, no news, they lose. Yeah? If they come to London and they get what they want, which is a conflict, we all know the entire right-wing press is going to make it black people started a race war. And clearly no black people are taking that position, and that is not the position black people are taking, that is not the position the anti-racist protesters are taking. And so that is my opinion on that. I think this is a time for grassroots community organising. I think this is a time for community self-defence. I think this is a time for supporting mutual aid organisations, so soup kitchens, breakfast clubs. We can all see the massive economic downturn that's coming. Obviously with Corona, loads of people have lost their jobs. Right now is the time to support your community and to build on the ground, and to if you're an OG in your ends and you've got support in your ends and you've got love in your ends and people respect you in your ends, organise locally in your ends, organise the momentum in your ends. Now is the time for squashing beef. That's what now is the time for, yeah? And if a time comes where our communities are attacked, we should never be the provokers. We should never be the ones seeking trouble. If our communities are attacked, of course, I am not a pacifist, and I believe firmly in self-defense, which is your legal right. Let's be clear, is your legal right. Act within the law, defend yourself within the law. But lie to draw acting is my take on it. So that was really the main thing I wanted to say, because I have been concerned, and really I'm interested in solutions. What's next? What are we building? Every week now I'm going to start posting up community organisations every Sunday. So start getting them together. I've been posting them out in general. If people are organising, if you've got a soup kitchen, if you've got a community organisation, if you've got a fund building something in the ends anywhere, if you're doing work in Africa or Asia or elsewhere, just every week I'm going to start posting up stuff, positive stuff. If you're running a workout club in your ends, do that. So let's start building that. Let's start making a new. We're already doing it. What's wicked is the current moment. It's now almost become everyone's on the same wave, innit? All of the man are on the wave of, nah, that's building time. We did that stuff when we was younger, and we might have made mistakes or whatever else, but actually now is community building time, and I think everyone's broadly agreed on that. I think all the music man on this live alone will tell you we're at a stage where even if we weren't all the best of friends when we was 21, at this age as grown men, we're all like, yo, I love you, brother, I want well for you, like, and we're building. And so it is a really beautiful time, and I do not want these people to get all the attention and take away from what is actually quite, for all the tragedy and for all the problems, is in a sense a beautiful moment. So I'm going to open up to questions and just start answering some questions. But that was something I felt like I needed to share on. First question: how does everyone go about uprooting and going back to Africa? Funny, good question. I don't endorse that as a political strategy, and I do not believe that is the strategy Marcus Garvey advocated for. In fact, what Garvey said was, men who are useless outside of Africa are going to be useless in Africa. I think there are people in Africa already doing great work. There are people in Africa already smarter than we are on the ground about what the challenges are on the ground. Until recently, the Chinese diaspora produced more wealth. The 3 or 4 million Chinese people living outside of China produced more wealth than the entire country of China, with all its 2 billion people. For the whole African diaspora to go back to Africa is not sensible. We have the right to live wherever we want. We have the right to be whoever we are. We should fight for justice, equal rights, equal opportunities, wherever we are in the world. Yeah. That does not mean, however, we should not just black people, all responsible human beings, but particularly people of African heritage, should have a stake in seeing Africa prosper and seeing the problems that exist in Africa cease to be so bad. So I think the question I would put to you who asked that question is, what role can the African diaspora play in Africa's development? Is a better way of phrasing it than we should all go back and live in Africa, because I don't believe in that. Not to say I wouldn't live in Ghana or Senegal, by the way. They're my two at the moment that I am considering. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying I don't support the mass repatriation. Let's scroll for a few more. Do I feel it will make an economic impact if we only invest in Black British owned businesses? I think that community self-development is important. I think that African Caribbean people building an economic base as an ethno-cultural group is important, the way many other communities do. And then you develop trade from a place of mutual respect and from a place of mutual respect. We don't need to boycott anyone else's business, but we do need, obviously, racism is also about class, right? And having no economic base makes you more susceptible to racism. As everyone knows, I'm also quite critical of capitalism, so I'm not just going to say, right, oh, if it's just a black business, then it's a good business. Some black businesses are exploitative, some black businesses are not worth supporting. So I think that, yes, I firmly believe in Pan-African community self-development, absolutely. But then once you've made that development, you might buy XYZ from that community, you might buy XYZ from that community, you might trade XYZ with that community. So I don't think necessarily the strategy, no group of people boycott everything produced by everyone else. I just think, but I do think now is a time for, again, community self-development is the way I would put it. Good question there. Other than teaching Black history in schools, what else can teachers do to support, I'm trying to read the whole question. What else can teachers do? I presume you mean to support anti-racism. I can't read the whole question. I don't think it's just about teaching Black history. That's the thing. I think the way it's phrased, for example, is that the history of racial slavery in the Americas is Black history. No, it's as much British history. If we're talking about the history of slavery in Jamaica, that's part of Britain's history. So Britain, for example, we talk a lot about the abolition of slavery. We'll erect a statue of Wilberforce or a painting of Wilberforce. But Sam Sharp, the Jamaican who led the largest slave rebellion in British history, is as much part of Britain's history as anything else. He helped lead to the abolition. That rebellion was just 2 years before the abolition of slavery. Sam Sharp is part of British history. And so I think even phrasing it as Black history, which I get why it is, we have Black History Month, that's very important to correct a lot of the misconceptions about Africa and the Caribbean. But understanding that Britain, a lot of people understand Britain had an empire. Very few people understand that Britain was an empire, i.e. the history of the entire British Empire is British history. And that's the way I would phrase it, that's the way I would get it into the curriculum. The only way we're going to have peace and respect in a increasingly multi-ethnic society is if people understand where others are coming from. And if children, not just Black children either, if white kids are being taught, as many have been taught for generations now, slavery happened, Black people sat around doing nothing and they waited for William Wilberforce to come and save them, that's not good for anybody. Because then when Black people do rebel, people are going to be like, oh, what happened to these people? I thought they were the people that just sit around and do nothing and wait for white saviours. Whereas if you teach the real history, everyone can sort of deal with this contentious issue in a bit more of a mutually respectful manner. If the actual history is, there was this history of racial slavery, very brutal, very horrible, only once in the whole history of the world has a group of people staged a successful slave revolution. That happens to be Africans in the Caribbean. It stops being a story that's about victimhood and it starts actually being a story about revolutionary success. And can you see that for Black children in particular, that is a very different way of learning the history of slavery than just, you know, your ancestors sat around waiting for Wilberforce. And even for white kids, it's like, right, their men were on job. Their ancestors got enslaved, they burned down plantations, they fought back, and that is a major part of what led to the abolition of slavery. So it's also about just teaching the whole story, yeah? But yeah, I think for teachers, I think it's that, and I think it's also, one other piece of advice for teachers is just being conscious of the way in which race and class and other things have affected people's perception of students, and not feeling, a lot of teachers I've found that feel so scared of being called a bigot that they often don't even want to examine whether or not they've dealt with a child differently because, you know, it's the big black guy, so it's the big black kid, so I've projected my fears and insecurities onto that children. So it's also being conscious of of that. Great question here. What should we be asking of the education system more broadly? Well, first of all, the education system everywhere in the world, and particularly in Britain, evolved in the context of a class-based society, right? There was never the idea that poor kids was going to get the same education as rich kids, yeah? So in that context, still now, kids are going to school and they're being taught stuff that just isn't true. They're being taught Britain is an equal society, equal opportunities. Do you think the kids who go to private school, they get taught to be manual labourers or to work in a hairdressers or any of those kind of things? No, of course they don't. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with those jobs. My pops was a manual labourer. No, like, I rate that. Honest day's work. But let's just be honest with young people, that if you go to a state school, you'll be educated to get a working class job. And if you happen to be exceptionally talented, very bright, lucky enough to have great parents, they might pluck you out and send you to a posh school so that you don't infect all the other plebs with the idea that you can just be whatever you want. So in a class-based society, the education system does not teach. I left school with straight A's. I never knew what capitalism was when I left school. I left school with straight A's. I never knew what a mortgage was when I left school. I left school with straight A's. I never knew what interest rate was when I left school. So all of these things, I never knew how to set up a limited company. I never knew how to grow food. So there are very specific things we're being taught in school. I never learned self-defense. So for me, someone just put they teach imperialism in private schools. Exactly, right? So for me, you know, if I was Minister of Education tomorrow, I would be teaching kids how to grow their own food, how to farm their own land, what capitalism was, what interest rates were. If we're going to do capitalism, at least give working class kids an equal chance to compete within the economy as it exists, which they're not doing. So I would reform the education system in a major way to make it much more meritocratic. There are some countries, as someone just pointed out here, ironically, a country like Jamaica, if you're an extremely bright kid from the ghetto, you can realistically become the Minister of Education, as has happened. If you're from a rural poor family, because there is a system in Jamaica where if you're extremely, extremely bright, you can work your way up and go to one of the better schools. So I'd bring in something like that, but I also would have major reforms in terms of what people are taught. Practical skills, vocational skills, and life skills. Relationships. Parenting is not taught at school. Shout out to a man like Loki. No one teaches you how to be a parent, the biggest job you're ever going to have to do. I would make a major reform to GCSE entry. My biggest pet peeve right now, even with the system as it currently is, the way it works in British schools, we have standardised universal criteria. We have standardised universal testing. So you have GCSEs and you have no standardised criteria for entry. Yeah. So what happens is, and the government knows this, the state knows this, working class white kids, their actual measured intelligence is, say here on average, they did a national study. The way teachers assess their intelligence is lower, yeah? Lower than their actual intelligence. So if you're a white kid from a poorer background, teachers often assume that you're not as bright as you are, and we get that. Let's be honest. You hear a Liverpool accent or a hood, Cockney accent or whatever, people have certain perceptions. For black children in particular, regardless of social class, what happens is children are much less likely to be entered for higher tier exams, and teachers under-assess their intelligence by a much greater degree than any other people, regardless of class. So I would reform that system, and I would make GCSE entrance based solely on your SAT scores, and you would see that actually that would make things much more meritocratic. I go into this a lot in Natives. I've got 2 chapters on education, and so all of the citations are there. I don't want people to think I'm just being conspiratorial. I look at all of the data on that. But yeah. Okay, so I'll answer that one. Even though I did a thread on this the other day. The thoughts on black crime. I mean, unless the violence in Naples, in the hood in Naples, there's a hood in Naples called Scampia, Secondigliano. Anyone who's watched Gomorrah knows what I'm talking about, right? But I've actually been to Naples, right? In the hood in Naples, people sell drugs, people kill people. Like any hood anywhere, right? In the hood in Glasgow, people sell drugs, people kill people. In the hood in Mexico, people sell drugs, people kill people. We've got to ask ourselves why in all of those cases where class is clearly the primary connector, when trading illegal drugs plus lack of opportunity is clearly the common denominator, why only for black kids does black on black violence get offered? And even if you're a mixed race ex-road youth like me, it's the black half's fault that you was violent, right? It's black on black violence. This is the biggest gaslighting waste of argument ever. Black on black violence doesn't exist. You think if black roadmen get robbed by a Turkish man, they're going to be like, well, you know what? They're not black, so I'm not going to clap back or do nothing. Even though I owe my Connect money and I'm in beef now, I don't kill black people. Of course not. And if you want to put that to the test, go and rob some black roadman and see what happens. I wouldn't recommend it, right? Furthermore, do you think white road youths in Liverpool would pet to beef the man them? Of course they won't, right? Who do you think is a greater risk of going to prison? A white youth from the hood in Liverpool whose parents are on drugs, for example, which is the case of some of the youths I've worked with, or a middle-class black youth who lives in Richmond? Even if you just look at rap music, how do you think all the rich rappers' kids are going to grow up? Man have got detached houses with back gardens. It turns out rich black rappers like back gardens and cups of tea and hot yoga and red wine just as much as other people with money, right? Even if you look at some of the men in this call, we've all known each other since our early 20s when our friends were on nonsense. Let's be honest. What happened? Did we all get an excessive melanin reduction operation sometime around 25? No, we grew up and we started to be successful. So black on black violence doesn't exist. It's a gaslight. For example, imagine when, this last thing I'll say on this, imagine when every time a middle-aged white man had a political opinion, if we gaslit them with, yeah, but until there's no more middle-aged white men who are paedophiles, I don't care about Brexit. How can you have an opinion on Brexit, Nigel Farage? There's still white on white sexual violence. And so I think that it's just a gaslight, bruv. Yes, don't get me wrong. Yes, we should be working to clean up the violence in the hood. Yes, we should be working for unity in black neighborhoods, but there's no violence among middle-class black people. Even in Jamaica, which has one of the highest murder rates in the world, if you live in Cherry Gardens or Norbrook or Plantation Heights, you might as well live in Hampstead. It's lovely, lovely. I'm considering moving there. That's how lovely it is. So violence everywhere in the world, street violence, is based on much more on class than race. Ghana has a murder rate that is no higher than Belgium's murder rate. In fact, there's only one city in the whole of Africa. Outside of South Africa, there is no city in the whole of Africa in the world's top 50 for murder rate. Outside of South Africa. Only South Africa on the whole continent of Africa. Only South Africa has cities that are in the top 50 in the world for murder rate. All of the rest of the top 50 of the cities in the world are in the Americas. And even with London, if you chat to most people in London, even most black youths, and you say, hey, do you think London is the most violent city in Britain? They'll say yes, it isn't. Usually it comes around 7 or 8th. If you ask them what percentage of violent murders do you think are committed by black youths in London? Young black boys, should I say, or black teenagers. I've asked teenagers this question, they say 80%, 90%. No, it's about 15% of the murders are committed by black teenagers. Then some are committed by the man then. But this, again, the whole thing is just gaslighting. We can care about more than one political issue at once. And most of us who have an opinion on police brutality and are out there doing work have also been in the streets trying to get the man them to do other things and trying to provide employment for people and trying to clean up our community. So it's an extra gaslight because the two sets of people are often very connected. Great question. What do I think are the impact of the UK media on black children? Well, you've only got to go to a majority black society to see the difference. I've worked in schools all over Africa. I've worked in schools in some of the supposedly wickedest ghettos in Jamaica. And what struck me, I went to a school called Jonestown Boys, which is on the border of Arima and Denham Town. Any yard man in the house will tell you that's the hood, right? When I said to the young boys in this class, what do you want to be when you're older? You know what the first response was? Man said, marine biologist. What's a marine biologist, big man? I had to go Google it. 12-year-old boy from the wickedest ghetto in Kingston, marine biologist. The next boy said lawyer. Next youth said judge. The point is, of course, young black children from the ghetto in Jamaica understand that their disadvantages are based on class. They know that there's no ceiling for them because they're black. There's a ceiling for them because they're poor. And so you see the constant bombardment of negative images about black people. How do you expect it not to affect young black boys? If young black boys think 90% of the murders in London are being done by the man them, they're going to go out in the street on smoke for the man them. And equally, you've only got to look at working class white kids. You know how much schools I've been to in the north of England where I'm working with working class white kids and they make fun of each other for being clever because they've internalized the idea that being clever is not their identity. The funny part about it is there's a long history of working class white intelligentsia in Britain. You think about people like Richard Hogarth or E.P. Thompson, but the class system in Britain is like magic. It convinces people to behave against their own interests. Yeah, and so this idea that it's just a black issue, nah, the African kids in England are doing better in school than mixed race kids, than black English kids, and than poor white kids. You'll never see that in the UK media. Even when I pointed it out on the news, everyone was like, no, I never even thought about it like that. And now I think about it, every uni I go to, it's bare Ghanaian and Nigerian youths. Shock horror, because enough of the Ghanaian and Nigerian and Zimbabwean young people in Britain, their parents had uni degrees before they got here, big man. They might be physically in Peckham, they might be physically in Tottenham, they might be physically in Hackney, but their parents had uni degrees before they got here. So it's no surprise that they're doing well in school, even in the facts of racism. And their parents, let's be real, I can see all my Niger and Ghana brethrens and people and supporters and everyone on here with the flags. If you don't go uni, your parents are going to stop chatting to you. Let's be honest, yeah? So there's all of that side of it as well. So I think that having a more accurate image of black households and ordinary black life, and not thinking that everything's all got to be dramatic, is really, really important. Do I think social revolution in America is possible, or is it just a pipe dream? I don't know. I mean, that's a question well beyond my expertise to ask. Can America reform itself without major violence? Can any capitalist society reform itself properly without major violence? I don't know. I'd like to think so. Major reforms have happened in America. Major reforms have happened in many countries around the world. But whether or not there'll be, and it depends what you mean when you say revolution. When you look throughout history, many revolutions have only led to reforms anyway. Yeah. And so I don't see the two things as mutually exclusive. Yeah. Even after the revolution, quote unquote, you still got to build a better functioning society, and that's no mean feat. It's one of the reasons I don't go around saying a lot of the trendy stuff that you see on Twitter, smash capitalism, blah blah blah, all this kind of stuff, because I think I have a responsibility as someone that, especially a particular set of young brothers, listen to me. I have a responsibility to pick my words carefully and wisely, and I think that trendy Twitter stuff is cool. But as someone who has actually managed businesses and managed organizations my whole life, I realize, if I have a hard enough time managing my family, keeping the disagreements in my family from overspilling, if I have a hard enough time managing my business and managing my youth organization, running a country is real tough. And so even after this revolution, whatever that means, the task of building a more functional society still awaits us. You think of Africa and the Caribbean. We've had many revolutions in Africa and the Caribbean, and yet the monumental task of playing civilizational catch-up, as I like to call it, with Europe and Asia is still there. Yeah, African countries, Caribbean countries still lag behind technologically, economically, in loads of places and in loads of ways. So even though we've had revolutions, we got rid of formal colonialism in Africa, and it was tough. We got rid of slavery in the Caribbean, and it was very tough, or rather our ancestors did. We still got to get the architects, the doctors, the scientists, the engineers, so on and so forth, hold our corrupt governments to account, so on and so forth. All of those challenges still await, and I don't have the answer to all of that. And anyone that tells you that they do, I would suggest to you is a charlatan. Yeah, anyone that thinks they have all of the answers about all of the world's problems is fibbing to you, bruv. And in fact, you might know or have better answers or better things to say on that than me, but major things are happening and major things are changing, so we'll see in it. Boom, boom, boom. Going back to the questions. Yes, man, like Henry, well, go on, old school. I'm seeing a couple old school names pop up there, you know, man, them I ain't seen for a minute. Well, go on. Thoughts on the Democratic Party and Joe Biden? Man don't support the Democratic Party, man don't support Joe Biden. So that one's quick. So someone was asking a question about black conservatives. I saw the beginning of it. Do I think black conservatives minimize the plight of, minimize the plights of black people, ... How do I see the whole of these questions? Someone post up how, because it's not coming up. But anyway, I presume the rest of the question, I'm going to assume the rest of the question is for approval or I don't know what. What I'll say is this. There are two types of black conservatism, in my opinion, right? There is the tradition of do for self, almost black nationalist conservatism, which in a sense you could argue, I wouldn't call Garvey a conservative in any meaningful sense, but in a sense you could argue sort of Booker T. Washington to a lesser degree, though it's much more complicated when you look at what Garvey said about Lenin, you look at other sorts of things. Garvey wasn't a conservative in any meaningful sense in that way. But I can respect black conservatives that are in the hood doing work. So if Thomas Sowell was in Harlem with a business school, I could say, you know what, I disagree with him, but he's putting his money where his mouth is and he's putting his ideas into practice. Instead, he sits on his high horse from Stanford University, basically cussing black Americans and saying black Americans have got a redneck culture. Now, what I've done over the last year, because man's just smoky like that, I love to use the kids' words, it's safe. You can tell a man's getting old when he forces young people's words into his sentence. I read about 6 or 7 of Thomas Sowell's books, just to see, is he really serious, right? Is he really got something so amazing to say? And on the one hand, some of the things Thomas Sowell had to say were interesting, were provocative, were fascinating, about 10%, 20% of it, but the rest of it was just bollocks, bro. There's no other way to put it. There were so many lies in there. For example, he has an essay called The Real History of Slavery, in which he argues that the history of the abolition of slavery was entirely to do with the West, and he just completely ignores the Haitian Revolution. His general argument is that culture is the greatest predictor of human outcome. Then he has an essay where he says the Holocaust had nothing to do with German culture. He argues in Wealth, Poverty and Politics that, or he tries to convince his readers in Wealth, Poverty and Politics that the riots in 2011 in England were basically anti-rich riots committed by poor white kids. If you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. He ignores Mark Duggan, doesn't mention it completely. So there are such huge flaws in his social history. I'm not qualified to argue with him about economics, but there are such huge flaws in his social histories that I just don't trust him. And I think any analysis, especially if we know the history of intelligence agencies flooding drugs into America, for example, scholars who ignore that, I'm like, on top of that, in all of his books, I have not found one sentence that is even vaguely critical of American foreign policy. How seriously am I supposed to take that? And so I would say that there is, like I said, the do-for-self black conservatism, and then there is the black conservatives who, as you can see with someone like Candace Owens, for example, a really mediocre person can build a huge platform just saying stuff racist people want to hear, overnight, basically. And if you've read her work, you'll know that she's just extremely mediocre. And the only reason she's got a platform that large is because she says stuff racist people want to hear. And so I think that's sad. And I think when someone's coming out at a time like this saying George Floyd weren't a nice person, that's what you're really willing, that's the energy you want to put into the world. The police have killed someone, and that's the energy you want to put into the world. I think that tells you everything you need to know about that particular tradition of black conservatism. Rather than some black conservatives, you know, like church pastors who are not corrupt, for example, there's some of those kind of people, they're quite conservative in a way, but they're in the hood doing work. I can respect that, that's fine, as long as you're putting your actions where your mouth is and you're serving your community. But if you're a political conservative, no worries. I'm not one of these self-righteous lefties who's like, you must all think the way I think, otherwise you're a bad person. There are entirely legitimate reasons to have a different view about the way a national economy should be run. That is very different from running around begging for approval from racist people. Do you know what I mean? That I can't respect that at all. I can't rate that at all. That's some idiot thing, basically. I don't like bad-mouthing individuals, but that's my opinion on that. I like to concentrate on ideas more than individuals. Kelechi said, with mediocre hair, Alexa. Yeah, there you go. That's basically what it is, isn't it? Like, I don't, like I said, I don't like picking on individuals, but I don't rate Homegirl at all. Thoughts on reparations? Yep, I think there is an entirely valid case to be answered for reparatory justice. Remember, Haiti never stopped paying reparations to France till 1947. The bonds that were taken out so Britain could pay slave masters compensation, reparations for losing their slaves, British taxpayers did not stop paying them off until 2015. That means British Caribbean taxpayers were paying back the bonds that were used to pay back slave masters. This ain't ancient history, and people want to act like 200 years ago. 200 years ago, what are we talking about? No, man finished getting paid the other day. And so I think there's an entirely legitimate case to be answered. Which brings me on to one thing which you lot ain't asked a question about. But there is a really toxic thing I see among some Caribbeans and some black Americans running around saying the Africans sold us into slavery. I would recommend every single one of you, exercise some common sense and think a bit more about history, and I'll explain why. But also read, there's a book called Resisting the Slave Trade, West African Strategies. The reason why I say this is because, firstly, political treachery has been normal among every group of people for all of human history, right? The Visigoth Spaniards invited the Moors in to conquer them. The Chinese helped the British sell opium in China. The Indian elite profited from the Bengal famine. The Anglo-Irish landlords profited from the famine in Ireland, and on and on and on, right? What actually happened in West Africa was that some people, of course, sold human beings, just as some black people would sell human beings today. Just as some people of every ethnicity today are engaged in human trafficking. What many of you have been so successfully brainwashed into believing is that there was no resistance in Africa itself. there were more rebellions on the west coast of Africa against transatlantic slavery than any island in the Caribbean. So tell the whole story. If you want to say there were African slave trades, of course there were, no problem. Just tell the whole story though, innit? There were more rebellions, I'm going to repeat that, on the west coast of Africa against transatlantic slavery than any island in the Caribbean. On top of that, the Haitian Revolution was fought by people born in Africa. Where do you think they learned to fight like that, Bregin? They were in armies in Africa. They were in armies in the Congo. They were in armies in Ghana. Most of the people who fought the Haitian Revolution were Africans. The Maroons in Jamaica were not born in Jamaica. They were born in Ghana. Where do you think they learned to fight like that? They learned those particular military tactics in West Africa. So all I'm saying is just tell the whole story. Some black people would sell you down the river tomorrow for money because that's how human beings work. Some of our own families would backstab us for money because that's how human beings work. But this idea that Africans were, on top of it, there's this idea that there's Africans, them and us. No black Americans, Jamaicans or Caribbeans left West Africa. The only people that left West Africa were Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, Ibibio, Wolof, Tukolo, Puel. They were Africans. They were Congo, they were Lingala, etc., etc., etc. So this idea that there was us and them, what about the African families left behind whose families got sold into slavery? You're not interested in their story? You're not interested in what they did to get their family members back? Your literal cousins were left behind. So that's one thing I really want to address because a lack of honesty around the history. Last thing I'll say on it, and some of those same Caribbeans and black Americans who say that are much less quick to talk about the history of Liberia. Yeah? Let's talk the whole thing. Much less quick to talk about the fact that the Maroons fought in the conquest of Ashanti, or that they did a deal with the British to preserve slavery. I'm not even passing a judgment on it all. History is very complicated and no one knows what they would do in a given situation if they weren't there. Just tell the whole story in it. Yeah? The Haitian Revolution was a continuation of African resistance in Africa. The Jamaican Maroons were a continuation of African resistance in Africa. Africa was not a paradise. There was class in Africa, like there is everywhere else in the world. African elites in one social class, willing to do things to their own commoners that they weren't willing to do people of their social class or of a different ethnicity, and so on and so forth. But this kind of simplistic blanket Africa. Last thing I'll say on it, I promise. The distance between Timbuktu and Luango, yeah, which is the capital of the old Empire of Congo, is greater than the distance from London to Istanbul. That's how big Africa is. And those two places are like this far apart on a dot in a map in West Africa. So you're telling me the whole of Africa was just one polity on top of all of that? There weren't different ethnic groups, there weren't different cultures, there weren't different histories and so on and so forth, right? So just tell the whole story. We don't need romanticism, but we don't need foolishness neither. We've only got about 15 minutes left because obviously it cuts off at 1 hour. So let me try and race through a few more questions. Thoughts on diversity and lack of leadership. It is what it is. I think there's a space to build people's own institutions, but there is a place. I'm not one just for the black faces in higher places kind of thing. Obama was a black face in a high place. I mean, I read them boy they are tall, you know. So it was also important that the black face in higher place has interest for his particular community, but and more importantly, like, it's just a decent human being, right? I don't want no, bruv. Some of our leaders, let's be honest, I don't rate them, bruv, at all. They're thieves. I don't rate them just because they're black. Idiot thing. So diversity in leadership is as important that the person has some integrity and has their community's interest at heart as it is that they just look like you. So I think it's that balance too, though, innit? Because we're seeing some of the people pushing the worst immigration policies in the country right now. Some of the people who voted for the war in Iraq, for example, they might look just like the man them. I don't rate them people. Let's be honest. I want people that I agree with broadly about politics too. I don't just want optics. Yeah, as it's just been put, I don't just want optics. Don't think you can just feed me a black face and I'm gonna get excited. I understand why for black Americans, emotionally, because they lived under apartheid in a way that we didn't in the same way in Britain, emotionally having a black leader was really important for them. I get that, I totally understand that. For us in Britain, we come from majority black countries where some of the leaders are idiots. You think you could just fool us with a black politician? We know some of them are fools, Bridget. And or as the Jamaican Rastas put it, even though Rastas are black nationalists, down with white and black oppressors. We're not just trying to replace white oppressors with black oppressors, yeah? So I think that, yes, representation is important. Yes, diversity in leadership is important, but credentials is important, though, innit? Man said Priti Patel, bruv. I'm not even, yo, Bridget. Mandatory books to read on African history. I've got a whole series of 40 book reviews on my YouTube channel. and I've got a whole series of African history books attached. If you Google Akala African history books, it comes up because my Oxford Union lecture, I did an old blog with a list on there. But if you go onto my YouTube channel, which is at Akala Music, just like this, I've got a review of 40 books on there. But the specific African history book list, you have to Google that because that's on another page. And there's a whole bibliography at the back of natives as well. I will make sure I save this live. Like I won't mess it up like I did last time. I'm going to address this one because this one can be confusing for a lot of people. Is calling ourselves black as mixed race men denying half of our heritage? In my view, absolutely not. Race is political, not biological. If I'd have grown up in Jamaica, I might have been a high colour uptown Kingstonian. If I'd have grown up in South Africa, I might have been coloured. If I'd have grown up in Brazil, I don't know what they would have classed someone of my complexion as. If Angela Davis and Malcolm X had grown up in the Caribbean, the whole perception of them would have been different based on colorism, right? Yet in America, they were one drop rule black. Obviously, everyone can see that those of us who are of mixed black-white heritage have one black parent and one white parent. I don't think anybody thinks, that, both of my parents are from Senegal. I think people can clearly see that I'm mixed. So by affirming your blackness, you are affirming, in my view, a loyalty to justice. Revolutionary black nationalism is not about hating anyone else, right? It is about supporting justice. It gave the world the first slave revolution in human history. It gave the world the ending of apartheid. It gave the world the ending of Jim Crow. It is a tradition that is about freedom. Mulatto nationalism has achieved nothing. Yeah, mulatto sticking together on the basis of being mulatto, all it really did was man owning a few slaves and taking up a place in the slave hierarchy in the Caribbean. So obviously people can see we're mixed. I think it's also important to ask why you can identify as black as a mixed person, but you cannot identify as white. And the reason for this is because white supremacist identity is a racially pure identity. You have to be 100% white to be white. Most other identities in the world are ethnic identities. So if you're Celtic, I could be Celtic, for example, right? Even though I'm half black, that doesn't undermine my Celtic identity. If I was born in Nigeria and I spoke Yoruba, people might made fun of me for being lighter. But from I speak Yoruba and I'm from the village and I'm culturally Yoruba, people would see me as more of as a Yoruba man than a fully black Yoruba person born in England who is culturally English, right? So I don't want to romanticize anywhere in the world because there's issues everywhere in the world, but I think it's important to understand why race is defined the way it is and why, for me, going around being like, I'm mixed race, I'm mixed race, I'm mixed race, as if people can't see that, is a way of saying I'm not black, I'm not one of them. And I personally don't take that position. And on top of that, I'm not judging no one else. I went to Pan-African Saturday School. My stepdad was the stage manager of the Hackney Empire, which was London's most important black-led community institution. So I had a very black upbringing. My mum, this will help you understand why I am the way I am. My mum got kicked out of the house when she was 16 for Oyimbo, I seen, for being with a black guy, and then was basically adopted by my dad's family and by a family of Guyanese Jamaican radicals. So culturally, my entire upbringing was a culturally radical Caribbean upbringing. So it was the only culture I knew. So it was what it was. So I think there's also that part of it, that a lot of this is about culture. Great question here. Thoughts on prison reform, rehabilitation. I must confess, I have not read a lot of the literature on prison abolition. Yeah. So I know people, right, everyone's saying another hour. I haven't read the literature on prison abolition. So I can't comment on prison abolition. There does need to be massive prison reform. Yeah. Currently, Britain has the largest prison population in the whole of Western Europe by miles. Absolutely by miles. Yeah. Why? We don't have significantly more murders than France. We don't have significantly more rapes than France. We don't have significantly more violence than Germany. 71% of the people in prison in Britain are in for non-violent crimes. So clearly we have a huge problem here with the way our justice system is set up. And of course, that is totally class-based. It's about locking up poor kids from Glasgow and Belfast and Newcastle, and specifically for young black boys. So yes, we need massive prison reform, and we need to start pushing for that strongly. We need to start divesting money from prisons to schools, to early community intervention programs, and this is the time to start pushing that agenda. Yeah, we need to start diverting money from prisons budgets and from police's budgets into community organisations, and showing that we can reduce crime this way, right? And showing that we can bring down crime in this way, because investing in people earlier makes more of a difference. Netherlands is a great example. Norway is a great example. Elsewhere, we will do another half an hour. We won't do another hour. We'll do another half an hour, because I can see everyone's got loads more comments and questions. So we'll do 30 minutes. I will log back on. I can see the popular call for it. So I'll log back on at 10 when this finishes, and we'll do 30 minutes more, but we won't do another hour. It'll be only 30 minutes. And I will stick to that, I promise, because, boy, I saw it go. But yeah, we'll do 30 more minutes. Let me look for a few more questions. But yeah, I do believe strongly in prison reform. Question here, would we benefit from black-only schools? Well, the funniest part about it is we already have black-only schools in London. Just look around. We just don't have schools that are designed to serve the communities that attend them. I've worked in schools in Peckham, 99.9% black youths. So it's already a black school, but it's just not a school running the interests with a curriculum designed to serve the kids who go to that school. So it's not about saying, do I think we benefit from only black schools? We have them. And the Black Saturday schools already exist. And they're doing very well. Check out East Side Young Leaders Academy, West Side Young Leaders Academy, South Side Young Leaders Academy. Those schools already exist. And this is an example of, right, so often the way racism works is about achieving racist outcomes without stating racist intent. So for example, and the great thing about it is often the people involved in it don't even understand what's going on. When the free school movement started, no one was going to say this is about allowing middle class white parents to pull their children out of increasingly ethnic state schools. But anyone with a pair of eyeballs can see that's what's happened. Yeah, London, one of the most multi-ethnic cities in the world. I go to Tower Hamlets right now. I'm going to go to a school 94% Bengali. I went to one 94% Bengali. I go to school in Peckham, 99% black. I've been to a school in Hackney, 99% black. Are those areas 99% black? Of course not. But what happens is two different sets of people are getting a very different type of education, even though they live in the same area, based on their parents' resources and partly based on ethnicity. So I think that we have to be clear that often what the establishment does is pushes essentially a racist agenda, or an agenda of the privileging of white interests, but doesn't state racist intent, and therefore it doesn't look racist. And so those are some of the things we've got to think about. But I think we also need a better curriculum overall. I'm gonna ask for go for a few more questions. So shall I save this one and log back in and do another? So I'm going to save this one right here before it goes to the hour, and log back in and do another half an hour. So I'm coming off now. I'll log back in, come and join us again, and we'll do a final half an hour. I'm going to save this video to stories. Safe. Should we be worried? How worried should we be about China's role in Africa and the Caribbean? This is a question I have been asked a lot of times. We should be worried. Of course we should be worried. Chinese people are people. That means they're capable of every virtue and vice that other human beings are capable of. And I think that when I've tried to answer this question, it's a very difficult thing. How do you find a balance between being critical of the Chinese government, critical of the way in which there's debt traps, critical of the way in which you disapprove of certain behaviours and certain deals that are being done, and not feeding into the sort of yellow peril narrative emanating from the West? You may remember a few years ago, David Cameron was like trying to warn Africa about the threat of China. Now, there might be some merit to being those concerns, but David Cameron ain't serious. Yeah, and so unfortunately, I think that again, lack of leadership, and leaders, that doesn't let China off the hook, by the way, for any deals that are done that are untoward or exploitative. But it's, again, I think for British African Caribbeans, our long-term strategy should be, how do we organise to use our relatively privileged position in Britain, and I say relatively privileged, I mean compared to brothers and sisters back home, to pressure home governments to act in ways that are more ethical and that serve our cousins and friends and uncles and loved ones back home. But yes, I do think people should be concerned. I also think people have to tread that narrative, tread that issue carefully, because it can be manipulated in a particular way here in the West also. So I don't really. There's some good books on this stuff as well though. I'll post some of political more. But anyone who's got some good articles or is better informed on that question as well, post some articles in the comment, because that's not exact my exact area of expertise. How do we start to hold the government to account, Regin? If I had an answer for that one, mate. Woof. I think that who knows? Who knows? Obviously, I don't believe in the two-party system. I don't believe it can bring about any of the kinds of changes that some of us would like to see. However, organising on a local level, building movements on a local level, building community strength. I think there's a place for non-violent direct action. I believe strongly in that. Intelligent direct action. Political discourse is changing. The funny thing is, depends what you mean, right? Think about how much Britain has changed since we were young. And if you wanted to be black and get on the television, wow, it was a madness. The things you had to do to be on the television. The kind of black characters that were put on the television. You think of Love Thy Neighbour, yeah? And it gives you a real sense of, in some ways, that things have progressed much better. But you got to build, exactly like someone says there, you got to build local power in your community. And then at some point, like I said, when you need direct action, when you need protest movements, when you need community pressure groups and so on and so forth, those are the ways in which you try and hold state power to account. But I do not think that the kinds of reforms many of us would like to see are going to come from within Parliament. It's one of the reasons people always say to me, why are you not going into politics? And I'm like, I don't believe I'm useful in Parliament. I don't believe I can do the kinds of things I would want to do in Parliament. I believe that we're better off out putting pressure on, is what I'd say about that. Is working with the government at all helpful? Yeah, I mean, you can't avoid government. You pay taxes to them. Don't get twisted. I'm not saying local government, council, school, being on boards, etc., so on and so forth. Arts organisations, those are all branches of government, right? So I'm not saying don't engage with government. I'm just saying let's not be naive about the limits of government and what the electoral system can produce. But of course, I mean, I'm not knocking anyone. If you can go into that system like Bernie Grant did and keep your integrity, more power to you. But very few politicians manage to do so. Bernie's one of the few I can think of that's gone in there and been himself. And so, if you're up for that and that struggle, go on. But it's just not for me. What do I think about voting? I voted for Corbyn, or I voted for a Labour Party under Corbyn. For me, there is not a compelling offer on the table right now, and so it's not personally for me. I'm not knocking anyone else. By all means, vote as a tactic, but it's not my thing. I'm going to address this one as well. This is another straw man that gets. We'll probably just take 3 more questions, right? But I'm going to address this one. Thoughts on single-parent black families. This is a straw man that gets used quite a lot as well, and it fools even a lot of black people. So the argument, here's how the argument goes. Violence in black communities is driven either by black on black violence, i.e. genes, black privilege is bad, or it is driven by single-parent families. No one ever makes the argument, funnily enough, that the violence in all of the other nations in the Americas, so let's take Jamaica for example. Jamaica's quite a violent country. Has the same problems as Mexico, has the same problems as Honduras, only Honduras is much more violent than Jamaica, has the same problems as the entire region. And the entire region experienced a massive upsurge in violence in the 70s and the 80s. So did the East End of Glasgow experience an upsurge in violence in the late 70s and early 80s. So did Naples, and loads of other post-industrial places experience an upsurge of violence in the 70s and 80s. What is more convincing? That all of the men of all of those different cultures, regions and countries all decided to abdicate parental responsibility at the exact same time. I don't know, did they have a meeting? Did they translate into Spanish and Portuguese? I'm not sure. And Italian. All that material history gives us a better understanding of familial dysfunction. What do I mean by that? If you look at the history of the Industrial Revolution in England or any country, you see men from the countryside being sucked into the city. They become landless, they get sucked into the city. Often, let's take my granddad, they're married before they leave the place where they are. So man leave Jamaica, leave his wife and kid at home For 5 years, work your backside off, build up some money, send for your wife and kid. People are not monks. In the meantime, you might have another child. None of that is to say that people who are irresponsible or abusive or act messed up as parents shouldn't be critical. It's just interesting that we say single parent black families. And again, none of the people who say this have attempted to demonstrate that there is meaningfully more violence in black communities once we adjust for class. So is there more violence in Hackney than there is in Croxteth or Easterhouse? Is there more drug addiction than there in Hackney than there is in Croxteth or Easterhouse? No. And so what happens really is that, just look in your own families, right? You take a man, good job, decent education, stable income, what we call sedentary employment. Yeah, so if you're a doctor, a lawyer, or an architect, and you look at the marital behavior of that group of men, is it meaningfully different among that group of men when they're black, when they're white, when they're South Asian, and so on and so forth? So a lot of what gets dressed up, anti-blackness is often just dressed up classism. So the black underclass who have a specific set of problems which they share with other underclass people for a whole host of reasons, and by which I mean people who have insecure employment, who live in areas of higher crime and higher violence, and so on and so forth. A lot of anti-blackness is dressed up classism, and black people who are poor are presented, and even then caricatured, and then presented as if they were everybody else. And obviously marriage in and of itself, when we say single parent, do we mean cohabiting or do we mean non-married? Because marriage in itself is a property institution. You know, lots of people from poorer backgrounds just don't get married because they can't afford it, on top of all of that. So single parent black families is often just a cliche. If Jamaica, and last thing I'll say on it, in 1962, Jamaica was not a particularly violent country. The murder rate in Jamaica in 1962 was about 3 per 100,000, which is the same as Belgium's is today. The worst years of murder rate in Jamaica in the 70s and 80s and 90s were about 45 per 100,000. It seems very unlikely that men in Jamaica were responsible parents for hundreds of years up until 1962, and then all of a sudden, in the height of the Cold War, in the context of the sectarian, almost civil war in Jamaica, that men suddenly said, I don't care for my kids anymore. It seems much more likely that the semi-civil war that occurred in Jamaica, which is not entirely dissimilar to the semi-civil wars that have occurred in Colombia or Mexico or Guatemala or Honduras and produced very similar results, that material history seems far more convincing than the idea that... Now, I can see everyone saying it's a stupid question, but lots of black people say this too, let's be honest. Thomas Sowell, this is his argument. Without any real material explanation of why... I grew up with bare white youths who had dysfunctional families. If you want to talk the thing, bare the Irish youths from Queen's Crescent had stereotypical dysfunctional families in which there was alcohol abuse and so on and so forth. I could say all sorts of silly stuff about how Irish people are this and Irish people are that. No, they were poor. Rich Irish people are doing fine. And so a lot of this is sometimes just a lack of knowledge of basic material history, or just plain anti-blackness. Sometimes people just want to say stuff that's anti-black and dress it up as if it's sensible. Great question. This is a good question. Should we have we lost the war on drugs, and should we legalize all drugs? I don't have a firm position on this because I don't know enough. What people have said to me who know more is look at the case of Portugal. They say to me that Portugal legalized drugs, and in Portugal the legalization and decriminalization of drugs has led to massive reduction in violent crime and so on and so forth. I don't know if that's true or not true. I haven't investigated the case in Portugal, but that's what people have told me. As someone just put in the comments, there is no war on drugs. There's a war on poor people. There's a class war, and of course there's an agenda to criminalize poor black people in particular. That is put under the guise of the war on drugs. Because by magic, drugs are always in the ends, and the man ain't got no aeroplanes or no boats. So that's a whole another discussion. But yes, if the evidence that I'm being told about in Portugal is accurate, then I don't see why we wouldn't pursue a decriminalisation and legalisation agenda, seeing as prohibition always leads to violence, as it when alcohol was prohibited. Is it too little, too late right now to accept the NFL Kaepernick apology? Yes, I think the rest of us, should tell them to go F themselves. If Cap wants to play and get his money, let him do his thing. I've got no knocking for him. But of course, the NF are being... The NF. That was a little Freudian slip right there. The NFL are being disingenuous, Bridget. Yeah, they're jumping on bandwagon jumping, clout chasing, whatever it is everyone calls it these days online. Thoughts on stop and search? Great question. Ethnically targeted stop and search is one of the dumbest policies ever, and the police know it. The last time I was stopped by the police was 3 weeks ago, right? Man's got grey hair, blood. I'm 36 years old. I'm not even the right age group. I keep saying this to people, like, officer, when they pull me over, obviously, this is how it goes, right? They pull me over, they think, you know, random black guy in a nice car, innit? They have a bad attitude. Then, halfway through it, one of the officers recognises me and gets embarrassed. And I'm just saying to them, look, brethren, I'm not even the right age. If I go to join the youth them on gang stuff, they're going to be like, yo, pensioner, what are you doing around here? You man ain't on it, you're an old man, right? So I'm not even the right age group. And that gives you a sense of why ethnically targeted stop and search is so stupid. And even when you start to look at the demographic, I'm not knocking no young brothers. I made mistakes when I was young. I carried a knife when I was young. I did all kind of foolishness at a certain age. This is the key point in this sentence here, at a certain age. And so the police understand that the demographic of young black boys that are likely to be involved in violent crime are from a very particular demographic. Once you control for the care system, so 50% of all the young people in prison in Britain are in care. 50% of all the adults who've ever been to prison were in care. Once you control for being known for social services, once you control for experience of domestic abuse, once you control for expulsion from school, once you control for pre-existing criminal records, you realise there's no black crime problem. Black road youths who are from a certain background, who've had certain troubles, I call youths like me what I call a 50-50 group. Yeah, there are three types of young people. There's the 80% group in any ends, regular working class kids, decent families, they're doing calm. They pose no risk to anyone. Then there's the next 15%. This is what I call, this is my theory, what I call the 50-50 kids. That's those of us who had enough good in our life that we kind of knew we was misbehaving, but enough bad things happened, we had enough problems, that with the wrong push, man got on badness, innit? But with just the right push, you rejoin the 80%. Then there is the last 5% of kids. And in every ends, everyone on this feed right now will know, on your estate or in your ends, there was two absolutely young boys in poor areas in general, but there was 2 or 3 families on your estate who had real problems. Maybe there was a family tragedy there, maybe there was a issue of drug addiction, maybe there was domestic abuse. Some of you Londoners, black Londoners that think London is the baddest city in this country, need to go and see the rest of this country. Yeah, that's what I would say to you. You need to go to Glasgow for a week. You need to go to Manchester for a week. You need to go to Liverpool for a week. You need to go to Newcastle for a week. You need to go to Belfast for a week, and you'll see all of the same problems. And here's the funniest part about it: the racial virtue signaling right-wing press are happy to ignore poor white kids because they don't care about them. They don't care about them one bit. The only time they care about poor white kids is when they think they can use them as a weapon against us. So when they start saying the left behind white working class, the issues in the hood in Liverpool are the same as the issues in the hood in London. The issues in the hood in Belfast are the same as the issues in any hood in London. The issues for poor people there are the same as down here, so on and so forth, right? What they want to do is tell poor whites essentially, you're not a savage. You're not like them black people, yeah? Even if you can see for your own eyeballs violence, drug addiction, poverty, domestic abuse, etc. in poor white neighborhoods, you're not like them. And if you can convince them that somehow you're better than the black people, you can get them to fight against the black people and use them in sort of what the way the government does, plays race against class, yeah? Very clever, very sophisticated way. But the issues are the same. And you've only got to look at gangster rap, right? UK gangster rap, road rap, whatever you want to call it. The moment the man them get some money, they move like every other middle class person, tell the truth. Some of them are on the feed. All the rappers on the feed, tell the truth. The moment the man them make some money, they live nice. They're like, yo, see that beef and that? It don't look so sweet right now, you know? I'm going skiing next week with the kids. Yeah? My youth goes horse riding. I ain't got kids, but I'm talking about the fact of what happens once the man them start to become successful. So the primary issue is poverty, is relative poverty, domestic abuse, and all the things that go with it. And so stop and search in that context, to get back to the original point, is that the police understand which demographic group it is, but they realise that if they pretend there's a general black problem, I can see all the rappers laughing. I know they be taking their kids skiing, bruv, and horse riding. And all, bruv, I went hot yoga, bruv. That's when you know you're middle class, bruv. Man went to hot yoga. If you'd have told me when I was 19 you're going to go hot yoga and salsa dancing, I'd have been like, nah, I'm not on it. But the point is, right, they apply stop and search broadly, because if they can convince the public and the press that they have 1.2 million unrowdy black people to police, they can justify a massive budget. If they say, well, actually, it's 2,000 kids and really they all grew up in care, so what they need is actually foster homes, what they actually need is more love, what they need is actually early interventions, what they need is more support, what they need is yeah, role models, but not in this idiot sense that they mean it here. What they need is better schooling. What they need is to not be expelled from school and then put into PRUs. Yeah, if there was more funding for schools to keep, yes, Mega said Bikram's lit. Right, what they need is more funding for schools to keep man in school rather than expel them. Because currently they expel man from school, and all the PR. Fecky's making me laugh. I've lost my point now. I'm putting spinach and avocado in smoothies. Big Fecky is putting spinach and avocado in smoothies. That's exactly my point. Once the man then becomes successful, it turns out once you've got something to live for, you've got a life to look forward to, your life's good, even with the kids. Think about it. If men are on road, you're in and out of jail, you cannot be the best father you want to be. The moment you've got a bit of money, you can be the best father you want to be. A lot of this is lack of material analysis and man moving and dressing up their lack of material, their anti-blackness in lack of material analysis. So the police want to do general stop and search along not even the right demographic, yeah? And non-intelligence led stop and search, which is how you can end up pulling over a 36-year-old when, like I said, man's a pensioner. I'm not on no badness, bro. Last two, and then we'll be off because it's 20 past now. And do follow up on my YouTube channel, and you can put more questions there and so on and so forth. Subscribe to man's YouTube channel, innit? youtube.com/Akala Music. Boom, boom, boom. I'm going to try and pick two good final questions. This is a good question here. Do you think we need to establish our own media to counteract the mainstream media? We've already done that. If you're a UK musician, you'll know that the UK music industry ignored black music for as long as it could. Then SBTV came along, then Grime Daily came along, then Fire in the Booth came along, then Link Up TV came along, and so on and so forth. So people already started establishing their own media because of the short-sightedness of the mainstream music industry. Now we need to take that one step further. We've got music now. We need to start thinking about drama. We need to start thinking about broader content. We need to start thinking about other forms of content within establishing your own media, because then that's the way you get the mainstream media to reform and take what you're doing more seriously by having your own platform. Yes, man, like Sway, what I go on, sir? Yes, bless up. Terry, what I go on? Terry Walker, shout on there. This will be the last question. Okay, no, I'm going to make this comment. Did I know my name in Punjabi means a black man? Yes, I did. I didn't know that when I chose it, or I knew. My understanding is, you can tell me. My understanding is it meant a black. Kala means black, but I chose the name because it meant immovable. Then I found out in Filipino it means I thought, and I found out that in Sanskrit it means eternal, and in one language among the Australian Aborigines it means a parrot. So, man's an eternal parrot, Regin. This is a really good question, actually. Is trauma the only thing we're advertising as ethnic minorities? It's a good question to end on, a painful question to end on, and a very valid question to end on. I went to watch a play a few years ago called Misty, yeah? And there was a line in that play that really stuck with me. And big up man like Arinze, yeah? There was a line in that play where the woman in the play is accusing Arinze's character, pardon my French, of writing a nigger play, right? Writing a trauma porn play. And the character says, I want a cycling through a city montage, yeah? Regular black family, like most black families, they want a cycling through a city montage, right? They do normal stuff. I hate to break it to, even the drillers. I say to the drillers all the time, I get onto them, only for fun though. I say to them, yo, like, I say to other people, when black rappers say their man are not about it, what do you think they mean? They mean that 99% of black boys couldn't kill no one even if they wanted to, because they've got parents that will punish them, because they've got people that will love them, because they've got expectations on them. That it takes a certain amount of things to go wrong in your life for you to get to that place. Why does this matter here? Because unfortunately, just regular life among black and Asian people, and even to an extent working class white folks, they get much more Jeremy Kyle show than young white youths doing stuff productive, right? So the issues of race and class are often intersecting, but there's a specific issue for black people. Let's not downplay that. There's a specific addiction people have to negative images of black people. And I think that finding the balance between addressing issues that exist and problems that exist, and having a cycling through a city montage, yeah, having just normal black life represented, having normal life represented among ethnic minority groups is a really tough thing to find the balance of. And I do think I try to carefully find the balance of, yo, I don't want to, you know, you don't want to always be on trauma. I don't, like, for example, I went Ghana for New Year's. I had a great time. Do you think black people are sitting around crying like, oh, it's so bad to be black, it's terrible, oh my God, it's awful, it's horrible? No, bro, Ghana was lit at New Year's. It was wonderful. The whole African diaspora was there. I got criticisms of the government and all that sort of stuff. That's a whole nother conversation. But when you come to the cookout, we're not sitting around depressed like this is so horrible being black. Nah, man, are having a great time. Grand's over there, boom, 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 so on and so forth. So I do think the trauma porn industry is mostly controlled by white liberals as well. And that's what people think sells, and that's what people think audiences want to see. And so I do think we have to be very careful and very conscious of sharing black joy, blood. That stuff's infectious. It's not all like depression and nonsense. Go to Trinidad Carnival whenever you like. Like, go to Sumfest or Rebel Salute in Jamaica. It's magnificent. It's like Glastonbury without the drugs. It's incredible. And so I think that side of what I'm going to call irrational black joy, yeah, that side of it, people need to see more of that stuff. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. We're having a great time. There's just a few people who ruin the party sometimes, and that is what it is. Like there is in any group of people. And so I do think that side of the thing needs to be seen more. That's really, really important. Ladies and gentlemen, yeah, check this out. I'll post this up on my YouTube channel and on my Instagram stories and IGTV and all that sort of stuff. It's been a pleasure chatting to you lot. Bless up, stay safe. I hope you're all well. Organize, do your thing, create. Big love to you all, yeah? Bless up, safe.